Is Guantanamo receiving high-level American prisoners? Benjamin Fulford is reporting hundreds of top Khazarian mobsters, including the Bush family, rendition to Gitmo. Source: Benjamin Fulford. In a historic moment of poetic justice, most of the U.S.-based top perpetrators of the fake war on terror have now themselves been renditioned to the U.S. Navy camp in Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, Pentagon sources say. The Rothschild assets George Soros, Peter Monk, Peter Sutherland, the Bushes, the Podestas, and many others may have been airlifted to Gitmo for military tribunals, as the Department of Defense spends $500 million to upgrade the prison and send more military police and Marines, the sources say. In one of many signs of just how historic the new American Revolution is, 30 congressmen will not be returning in the new year, the Pentagon sources say. CIA sources also confirmed that former U.S. President Bill Clinton, hoping for a plea bargain, is spilling the beans on people like former CIA head John Brennan, top U.S. Mossad agent Rahm Emanuel, former Vice President Dick Cheney, and many others. Furthermore, as U.S. President Donald Trump proclaims January 2018 to be Anti-Slavery Month. Human trafficking centers around the world are being raided and shut down. In Saudi Arabia, 3,000 child sex slaves have been freed, according to Russian FSB sources. In the U.S., there was a power outage on December 27 at the Pado Heaven Disneyland, as the place was raided by special forces fighting human slavers, the Pentagon sources say. In apparently connected events, Washington Post Bill Graham and Jordan Feldstein, the brother of the actor Jonah Hill, died last week, the sources point out. Another move was that Julian Assange was extracted from the Ecuadorian embassy to take down the cabal, and he may be pardoned along with Mike Flynn, the sources add. Trump orders deployment to Gitmo. Source: Thiegel.com, December 29, 2017. To the astonishment of many, President Trump decided to send the Arizona 850th Military Police Battalion for a 9-month mission to Gitmo Base in Cuba today. The official statement of the Arizona National Guard says that this is the second deployment for the 850th Military Police Battalion in the last 10 years in support of overseas contingency operations. This may seem like a random act, but given that there are currently only a handful of detainees left in Guantanamo Base, 55 is the official figure, sending a whole battalion does sound like overkill. Developing story at AZ National Guard 850th Military Police Battalion are deploying tomorrow for 9 months at GTMO on the Friday between Christmas and New Year's. Is this a classic PR dump or just the way the military works? What do you think of this mission? Furthermore, with Vice President Pence visiting just a fortnight ago and Secretary of Defense James Mattis making the first visit by a Pentagon chief in 16 years on 21 December, the internet is rife with speculation that new prisoners will soon be transferred to Gitmo again. During his visit, Mr. Mattis did not tour the detention facilities but held meetings with the officers and offered Christmas wishes to the soldiers present. The last defense chief to visit Guantanamo Bay before him was, in fact, Donald Rumsfeld, who went there in January 2002, only a few weeks after the first detainees arrived from Afghanistan. The detention center, which was set up to hold suspected terrorists shortly after the 9/11 attacks, was high on Trump's list during the presidential campaign, when he stated, "We're going to keep, as you know, Gitmo, we're keeping that open." President Trump asked Congress in the spring of 2017 for additional funding, which the Republican-controlled House incorporated in a 2018 spending bill. The goal is to provide $115 million to build new military barracks for U.S. troops stationed at the base. It furthermore states that the detention camp would be shielded from closure and prevents the transfer of detainees to the United States. Mattis makes unusual visit to Gitmo. Source on Y post by Yaron Steinbush, December 21, 2017. Defense Secretary Jim Mattis visited the U.S. Navy base at Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, on Thursday to offer holiday greetings to troops, the first trip there by a Pentagon chief in almost 16 years. Mattis did not tour the detention facilities or discuss detainee policy options during his stay, which came amid uncertainty over the Trump administration's policy on continued use of the military prison. President Trump hasn't released any Guantanamo prisoners or added any to the list of those who have been officially cleared to go home or to a third country for resettlement. The last defense chief to visit Guantanamo Bay was Donald Rumsfeld, who went there in January 2002, just weeks after the first detainees arrived from Afghanistan in the early stages of the fight against terror. The detention center was set up to hold suspected terrorists shortly after the 9/11 attacks. Of the 41 prisoners who remain in detention, 10 have been charged by a military commission and 5 have been cleared to leave, but their status is in doubt under the current administration. That leaves 26 in indefinite confinement, though some could eventually also be cleared for release or be prosecuted. Lawyers are considering filing new legal challenges, arguing that a policy of no releases means the detainees' confinement no longer can be legally justified as a temporary wartime measure. Mattis has said little publicly about Guantanamo Bay since taking office in January. In response to written questions submitted to him before that hearing, he said, "I believe that we should develop a repeatable detainee policy that is appropriate for enemy combatants taken prisoner under such circumstances." U.S. Attorney General Jeff Sessions, who visited the facility in July, underscored the administration's support for continued use of the prison. He called it a perfectly acceptable place to detain new terrorist suspects, as opposed to holding them in the U.S. and having his own Justice Department try them in civilian courts. From August 2017, Trump's Pentagon wants to spend almost $500 million on Guantanamo construction. By Carol Rosenberg, Miami Herald, August 21, 2017. Guantanamo Bay Navy Base, Cuba. Behind the scenes, the U.S. military is planning for nearly $500 million in new construction during the Trump administration, including a Navy request to build a $250 million, 5-bed hospital here that has been singled out for study by a Senate committee. Despite President Donald Trump's campaign promise to reduce costs at the remote U.S. Navy base, at one point he mused that his new Cuba policy might import cheap, local labor from across the minefield. The Pentagon's appetite to spend at this outpost of about 5,500 residents and 41 wartime prisoners continues unsated. This Obama-era law makes it possible to arrest and jail you indefinitely anytime. Huffington Post by Steve Mariotti. In 2012, the U.S. Congress passed the National Defense Authorization Act with relatively little attention from the media despite the freedoms it obliterated. The NDA was enacted to empower the U.S. military to fight the war on terror. But buried in this law are two provisions, sections 1021 and 1022, that authorize the indefinite military detention, without charge or trial, of any person labeled a belligerent, including an American citizen. These NDA provisions, which have been reapproved by Congress and signed by President Obama every year since 2012, override habeas corpus, the essence of our justice system. Habeas corpus is the vital legal procedure that prevents the government from detaining you indefinitely without showing just cause. When you challenge your detention by filing a writ of habeas corpus, you must be promptly brought before a judge or into court, where lawful grounds must be shown for your detention, or you must be released. Under Section 1021, however, anyone who has committed a belligerent act can be detained indefinitely, without charges or trial, as a suspected terrorist. This is a direct violation of the U.S. Constitution and our Bill of Rights. In the Federalist number 84, Alexander Hamilton stressed the importance of the writ of habeas corpus to protect against the favorite and most formidable instruments of tyranny. Only 13 senators voted against the NDA in 2012, including Bernie Sanders IVT, Al Franken D. Minnesota and Rand Paul Ike. According to Dan Johnson, the 23-year-old founder of People Against the NDA Panda, our current presidential candidates do not seem concerned about it either. Hillary Clinton has been entirely silent about it, while Donald Trump has come dangerously close to endorsing it, approving of military trials for American citizens at Guantanamo Bay just this month, Johnson notes. The curious irony of this CNN post from last year: can Trump send American citizens to Guantanamo Bay? Source: CNN by Laura Jarrett, December 3, 2016. If President-elect Donald Trump decides to make good on his campaign pledge to load up the prison camp in Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, with new domestic terror suspects caught in the U.S. including American citizens, legal experts say he is asking for an unprecedented constitutional showdown. Voters first received a peek at Trump's stance on Guantanamo Bay back in 2015 when talking points on various policy questions were leaked ahead of a Republican debate. On the issue of whether he would close the detention facility, the memo stated I would also take away the passports of Americans who fight for ISIS and send them to Gitmo for some R&R. On the campaign trail in February he railed against President Barack Obama's promise to close the facility, vowing to fill it up with additional detainees. This morning, I watched President Obama talking about Gitmo, right, Guantanamo Bay, which by the way, we are keeping open. And we're gonna load it up with some bad dudes, believe me, we're gonna load it up, Trump told the crowd. Trump went a step further in August, telling the Miami Herald he would be fine trying U.S. citizens suspected of terrorism in military commissions. From MegaAnon, via Reddit. What evidence is lacking? This is literally one of the most MSM-covered areas you could easily put together yourself, but I guess I'll do it for you. If by extrajudicial, you're implying illegal, then please, go read 2014's last revision of the NDA. Thanks to Obama, you, an American citizen, still can not only be detained without warrant and indefinitely, but yes, you can be shipped to but not limited to Gitmo. When you're reading that bill again, please note the specific language around terms like terror, terrorist, terror state, human right violations, etc. It will be helpful as we progress. Remember, before numbers 2-4 below were put in place, it was still legal, but could have been a hard-fought battle in Congress. Today, it's thanks to 2-4, that there's no red tape. Not even a hiccup. Remember when the State Department recently named and officially added North Korea as a terror state? Remember when immediately preceding that, Trump signed an exec order, directly targeting North Korea's trade partners. This severely sanctions and calls out the financial ties/funding/kickbacks via corporations, organizations, nations and individuals, working with and funding NK, directly or indirectly via contracts, subsidies, etc. and through those nations' central banks as well. Then, remember when his latest executive order last week on human rights, targeting and freezing the incoming, outgoing financial assets and business paths for nations, organizations, corporations and individuals tied to human rights violations, including those who directly or indirectly support, aid, finance and/or harbor terrorism. It's now even cited as a national state of emergency. Freezing the assets without warrant or pursuant of notice? These things are all Googleable. And with Trump/Tillerson's actions, between North Korea, the Middle East and Africa alone, you've now got a whole lot of criminals, who are absolutely and very legally, eligible for Gitmo, with a ton of frozen bank accounts to match. See why you have to give them ankle bracelets and signy O's unexpectedly right before you freeze a few accounts and make a few arrest sweeps. You can't dip off enemies of the state too far in advance. Huma's had hers on the left this week.